What's going on, everybody? Anthony Servino here with the Face Off Sports Network, and I'm going to give you my top 6 starts and sits at the running back position for fantasy football week 3. Let's get right into it with the starts. Let's get into DeAndre Swift, and I get it. DeAndre Swift hasn't done much of anything this year, nor has the Chicago Bears offense led by Caleb Williams, but I think we see things begin to turn around for DeAndre Swift. Now, this matchup, he gets the Indianapolis Colts. They're the 24th ranked defense against fantasy running backs and PPR scoring formats, and they've been gashed all season long, have the Colts, most notably against the Packers. They were thrashed for 151 yards on 32 rushing attempts. Did not give up a touchdown to Josh Jacobs, but he had his way on the ground, 14.1 PPR points. Joe Mixon in week 1, 30 attempts, 159 yards, a touchdown, 3 of 3 targets for 19 yards in the season opener. Two running backs that went for at least 30 carries and 151 rushing yards. You can run on the Indianapolis Colts, and I expect DeAndre Swift to get going this week. He's also an excellent receiver out of the backfield, something that we began to see a little bit last week. Now, obviously, week 1 against the Titans, he was shut down. But last week, 8.2 PPR points, not great, but he did handle 44 offensive snaps. The next best, Travis Homer with 18. Khalil Herbert, who did score a touchdown, he had 6 himself. But when it comes to DeAndre Swift, 14 rushes, 18 yards, not great efficiency, but he popped a little bit as a receiver out of the backfield, 5 targets, 4 catches, 24 yards to kind of give him a salvageable fantasy day. But again, we did see him with the 5 targets, 4 receptions, aforementioned 24 yards. He also ran 27 rounds. So out of his 44 offensive snaps, he ran a route on 27 of them, an 18.5 target percentage when it comes to targeted on routes run. So DeAndre Swift, I think we finally see him get on track. And I do think the Bears offense, if there's ever a game where Caleb Williams can get going, it is this one against the Colts. Let's go to my next running back start, Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson was a sit for me in week 1. He was a start for me last week, which worked out. And I'm going to keep hammering Brian Robinson. And what do we know about Brian Robinson? Brian Robinson, there are no question marks. He is the running back to have from the Washington Commanders. And I get it. Austin Eckler is not going away quietly. On limited touches, Austin Eckler, 10.2 PPR points week 1, 11.5 last week, but he's not getting a lot of touches. He only had 6 touches in week 1. He had 11 touches last week, most of them as a receiver. But when it comes to Brian Robinson, this is the guy getting dirty. 17.9 PPR points in week 1, 14.6 last week. When it comes to snaps, 41 to 30. And there was a gap there because in week 1, Brian Robinson had 32 snaps to Eckler's 28. Last week against the Giants, 41 to 30. So we're beginning to see a little bit of a separation. Brian Robinson's on the field a hell of a lot more. Moreover, Brian Robinson, 17 rushing attempts, 133 yards. He also caught 1 of 3 targets for 3 yards. In fact, back-to-back games, at least 3 targets for Brian Robinson. And Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson, right? I got a lot of people thought, Eckler's going to push Brian Robinson for the early down work. That's not happening. It is not close. What's really happening is that there is a workload split when it comes to passing opportunities. Both of these running backs have 7 targets total on the year, which is why I get Eckler's going to do his thing here and there, but eventually he's going to get 10 touches, 8 touches, and not do a damn thing. Meanwhile, Brian Robinson, this guy, they are hammering him home at least 15 touches to open the year in both games. Last week, 18 touches. And He's the best running back on his football team. And now he gets the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is a pretty favorable matchup. Cincinnati, pretty good defense here and there, but they've struggled a little bit to contain running backs. In week 1, Ram Stevenson, 25 buck, 20 and 1. Last week, Pacheco, pre-injury, 19 for 90, and Pacheco also caught 5 for 21. So there's production to be had against Cincinnati. And what do we know about the Washington Commanders? They struggle, or not they, the quarterback, Jaden Daniels, struggles to push the ball downfield to the wide receivers, which means Brian Robinson is once again going to get down and dirty in week 3. He's a must start for me. Let's go to my final guy, and Zach Charbonnett. And Zach Charbonnett, very valuable handcuff because of Kenneth Walker. Now, Kenneth Walker, very good running back, but he has missed some time every year he's played football. And this year it came as soon as week 2. We know last week, Kenneth Walker down with the oblique injury, and Charbonnett, 17.9 PPR points. In fact, in week 1, when both were healthy, they ran all over the Denver Broncos, and even Charbonnett found the end zone, 12.1 PPR points. So now this is another backfield. Both guys are valuable. It's not just contingent upside for Zach Charbonnett. He's going to get some run even when Kenneth Walker is in. However, we don't know about Kenneth Walker's status. If Kenneth Walker plays, I think we could still start Charbonnett with tempered expectations, maybe throw him in your flex spot. After all, this is the Miami Dolphins defense, and we'll get that to them in a minute. But as I'm seeing right now, when it comes to practice reports, we don't know if Kenneth Walker is going to be out there, and it is early in the week, but oblique injuries can sometimes linger. So I'm treating this as Kenneth Walker is going to sit. And if he indeed sits, this is a Miami Dolphins defense. They've been trashed and gashed and smashed by enemy running backs through 2 games. And we all know the most recent one, Thursday Night Football week 2, when the Buffalo Bills, notably James Cook, ran down Miami's throats. And it wasn't pretty. James Cook, 11 for 78, 2 touchdowns, 1 of 17 to the receiver with the other touchdown. But even in week 1, Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, they combined, did the Jacksonville running backs, for over 110 rushing yards and a touchdown. And Etienne also had another 15 yards as a receiver. So this is another favorable matchup. And I do believe there is a world where if Walker plays, maybe he's with limitations, and we could start Zach Charbonnett. So I'm very, very much in it. If Walker's out, Charbs is a must start. If Walker plays, I'm still comfortable starting him in this matchup. Now let's go to my sits. Let's go to Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary last week, even in week 1, 19.2 PPR points in week 1. Last week, 16.5, much better matchup against Washington. And what do we know? Singletary dominating snaps, 89 snaps combined for the year through 2 games. Tyrone Tracy, 24. Eric Gray, 7. Now, this past week, they were very much in a game. Wasn't a blowout like week 1, but it was the Commanders, 16.95 and a touchdown. Only targeted once for reception. Did not gain a single yard on it. And Singletary only ran 12 routes out of 41 offensive snaps. Also garnered 2 red zone touches. But we're not like, this isn't Devin Singletary. He isn't a 5.9 yards per carry runner. This was, the Washington Commanders. They were getting smashed by Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson, and they were probably trying to let's not keep letting these receivers beat us and open holes for Devin Singletary. Things are to get tougher this week, and it gets tougher in the form of the Cleveland Browns, one of the more stingier defenses against enemy running backs in the NFL. And running backs have fared okay through the first 2 games, right? Zeke, week 1, 40 yards, touchdown. ETN last week, 52 yards, touchdown. I'm sorry, but I'm not fearing Daniel Jones like the enemy defense is going to fear Dak and Lamb, or, Lawrence. As bad as it's been, they still have some weapons there that the enemy defense has to focus on. if I'm this Cleveland Browns defense, you could probably contain Devin Singletary, Daniel Jones, and Malik Neighbors fairly easily. This is one of the more talented defenses in the NFL. And after 2 games where I feel like Cleveland, they're starting to pull it together, right? You get blown out in week 1. Last week, you concede only 13 points. And now they could be pitching, under 10 points. I want to say shutout, but they could potentially hold the Giants to 13 points or under 10 points. So I am completely out on Devin Singletary this week. I just don't love it. By the way, he also lost a fumble against Washington. And we know you keep putting the ball on the ground. There's those young guys, Tyrone Tracy and Eric Gray, who could potentially get some of those snaps and opportunities during the game. Let's go to another sit. Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard, and I was in on him after the Brooks injury. I thought this Carolina team would be better. They upgraded their guards. I thought they were going to run the ball a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently. This is one of the worst offenses I've seen in a very long time. And we watch football where the New York Giants play. That's how bad it is in Carolina. And Chuba Hubbard in week 1 was erased by the Saints. Last week, 11.6 PPR points, not bad against the Chargers. 10 for 64, 4 of 12 as a receiver on 5 targets. The matchup looks okay here against the Raiders, right? Like on paper, they're 23rd against fantasy running backs. But I just don't know how much I trust this situation with Chuba Hubbard, because if he does not get those 4 receptions last week and those 5 targets, and he was not targeted week 1 in that blowout, then you're getting under 10 PPR points. And oh, by the way, Miles Sanders, remember him? Miles Sanders last week, 7 rushes, 20 yards. He also had 3 targets, hauling in all 3 for only 5 yards. But Miles Sanders, 20 snaps in week 1, 19 last week. Chuba Hubbard is still out-snapping him, but we could see Miles Sanders start eating into that workload a little bit. That also scares me off Chuba Hubbard. This isn't a team that scores a lot of touchdowns. This is also a team that pulled the plug on their quarterback and Bryce Young. We're going to see Andy Dalton. And why is that bad? Because we know Andy Dalton. He's a veteran quarterback. He's going to hang in the pocket. He's going to throw it. He has nothing to lose. I think we see a more higher flying, as weird as that sounds, passing attack from the Carolina Panthers. And I'm out against this Raiders defense. Let's look at the numbers on the defense before we wrap up. They were obviously smashed by J.K. Dobbins in week 1. Derrick Henry, 18 for 84. That's Derrick Henry, also scored. On paper, this looks like a good matchup. The Chargers, built to run the football. Dobbins, one of the better running backs in the NFL when he's healthy. Baltimore, built to run the football. Threat of the RPO with Lamar Jackson. Derrick Henry, possibly a Hall of Famer. This is the Carolina Panthers. This is Andy Dalton. This is Chuba Hubbard. I get the matchup looks good. He's a touchdown-dependent sit for me in week 3. Now let's close it up with my final sit. I'm sitting the Cowboys backfield, everybody. I'm a Cowboys fan. I can't do it. And, this offense is going to be fine. Dak's going to be fine. This running back field is atrocious. And I think we're going to see Zeke and Dowdle cannibalize each other. In fact, they both played 56 snaps exactly this season. And if you look at the numbers, last week, Dowdle, 9.9 PPR points, where in week 1, he had under 5 PPR points. Let's flip-flop it. Ezekiel Elliott, in week 1, 12.9 PPR points. 5.2 in week 2. What's the discrepancy? We know Zeke is going to get those early down touches. He's going to get the scoring opportunities. Rico is probably going to get the receiving opportunities mostly. And that's where really Rico Dowdle did most of his damage as a receiver out of the backfield in a blowout loss, where Rico Dowdle, 4 or 5 targets for 29 yards, where in week 1, he was only targeted once. That was a game script situation. Now you get the Baltimore Ravens. They're an excellent team at running at stopping enemy running backs from running the football on them for fantasy purposes. In fact, week 1, Pacheco, as great as he's been, 15 for 45, one of the more inefficient days for Isaiah Pacheco. He did score, also caught 2 receptions for 33, but as a runner, Pacheco could not get going. Against the Raiders, Zamir White shut down. Alexander Madison, who looked like a week 1 stud, shut down. And the Ravens are desperate. They're 0-2. They need this game. They are not going to let this running game get going. They're going to make Dak Prescott beat them. And once again, these 2 running backs in Dallas, they are extremely scoring dependent to return value if you start them in your fantasy football team. I'm Anthony Servino. If you like this video, hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button, the alert icon, so you can be notified anytime we are live to answer your questions or drop content, which we do all the time, just like this. Till next time, this is the Face Off Sports Network. Good luck in week 3.